Okay. Good morning, everyone. It's recording now. I'm Marion Lyon Hayes. I'm a member of the Discipleship Committee. And just in case not everyone knows, we aren't having our normal Sunday school teaching. We're having a town hall for CCPC. There's 3 town halls. One was Thursday, today, and then there's Tuesday. And the town halls on our discernment around the question, racial injustice, but what can we do? Today we have 4 great members of this session who will be presenting to you. Liz Rasley, Earl Berner, Cindy McIntyre, and Angela Bettelspacher. Hopefully I said that right, Angela. And Ellen will be our pastoral representative. In addition to the 4 session members that are going to be talking online, we also have Eric White, Sydney Covey, Jay Bryan, Sharman Paulos, and Stephanie St. Clair. As you heard, we are recording this like we do every Sunday school, but when the presentation will be recorded up to the point Q&A begins. Then I will stop recording, just like we would normally for Joys and Concerns in Sunday school. We want everyone to feel free to ask and discuss. We are family and everything should be open for discussion. The team really wants all of our involvement as we move forward on this. So with that said, if as the presentation's going and you have questions, you can enter them into chat. When Q&A begins, those will probably be the first questions we'll read out and answer to you. So with that, Ellen, you get to take over the screen.
There we go. And who's starting? Is that Liz or Angela?
It's me, and you guys can hear me?
Yeah.
All good? Okay. So I believe we have an opening prayer, and it's either
That's
Marion
me.
or Ellen. There we go.
That's me. I didn't know if there was any presentation before that. Okay, so let's pray. Holy God, we want to follow you. And we see unjust things happening around us and a world that is hurting. And you have put in our hearts a new mission statement. And it seems like groundwork has been laid. And so we're listening. We pray that you'll be throughout this process and that this church will truly be an extension of you. We believe it has been. We've always wanted to listen, but this is, we feel like we're kind of in a new place. And so we are yours. We pray for your presence here. Give us ears and eyes and hearts for you. And I pray this in Jesus' name.
Amen.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ellen. All right. Yes, I'm Liz Rasley, an elder here at CCPC on session. And we are here to go over some of the work we've done around this issue, racial injustice and reconciliation, and our next steps as a congregation and as a session, and how we're asking the congregation to be involved. So if I could have the next slide. So like worship, right? This quote speaks to the same sort of thing. We don't necessarily all enter into worship the same way or even get the same thing out of worship, as we come from different experiences and backgrounds. And same with this work. We may have all come on different ships, but we're all in the same boat now. And as Marion said earlier, we're family. So we're going to be doing this all together. Next slide. All righty. So we thought it would be wise to start here with our mission statement, which if you look at it, it's not all of it, but it's some pretty important pieces. and our tagline, right, that Andy came up with, which was building relationships wherever we go. So in 2019, we started our mission statement after actually a long discernment process, identifying the strengths of our congregation and where we saw ourselves as people and maybe the people we needed to grow into being. A good mission statement, from what I can understand, is both of those things, stating who you are as a people and your stance in things, and then also what you grow, what you hope to be. The thing about this mission statement, it was again, about 5 of us that helped piece this together, is I've done a lot of work around writing, but this is probably the most important thing I've done. And that's not to say that I helped really with all the words, but because of how important this work was in stating who we are. And the reason I feel it was so important, at least to me, was this was exactly the congregation we walked into in 2016 when my family joined, and felt all of these things. And I felt very strongly about including a lot of these. And the one that we as a committee felt the strongest about, and really where we saw the strength of our entire congregation, was around affirming the value of every person without exception, which, if you remember in the before times of 2019, churches weren't taking stands like that. That was a little bit of like walking out on a plank by saying that and stating that so clearly. And it was interesting, some of the discussions we had around that, there were so many stories that came up about people in the congregation affirming the value of every person without exception. The other one that was really important to us to include was responding compassionately to the needs of our neighbors, and then also seeking what God wants to do in us and through us, which is all things that we are, all things that we intend to be, and in a way, maybe God equipping us for the work of 2020 and 2021. Okay, can I have the next slide, please? So it's been a while, right, since summer of 2020. We don't necessarily want to go back and do a deep dive, but I feel like we do need to talk about it just a little bit because it has been so long. I don't know what anyone else took away from it, but I've been through at least 5,000 emotions since then. It seems about 900 days ago that it was summer of 2020. Just to kind of help you get back in that mindset of how different we were just almost a year ago. We were still really not sure about the pandemic. We didn't think that maybe there was a vaccine on the horizon. I think we were all still questioning when we went to the store, should we wash the chip bag before we open it and eat the chips? Right? We still didn't know a lot, actually, and we were all trying to muddle through the best we could. Some of us had kids in school and had to figure out how to work at home with kids and then also do summer at home with kids. At this time, too, I remember there was a lot of drive-through birthdays that you would literally get in the car and wave at the person having a birthday party. And what a sweet world we live in now is I think our children can actually get out of the car and participate in a birthday party. So summer of 2020 was really different. It was still hot though, right? The pandemic was still on the news. And also at this time, if you remember, Chris took a sabbatical, which I had also forgotten since it'd been, again, 5,000 emotions. So, but under this was kind of an undercurrent of unrest and racism. Maybe there was some of this building, maybe it had been there all along and some of us just didn't even see it or pay attention to it. But the tipping point really came in May around George Floyd's death that made some of us really sit up and pay closer attention and maybe want to do something or try and figure out how all this had happened. So because of this event and the unrest during and after, we as a congregation fraught with what to do and how it got so bad and what it was all about. So if you remember, to the left, we had a prayer vigil on the steps of the church I believe this was before we got into worship on the lawn. This seemed like the start of kind of us gathering outdoors. And we did it in the parking lot because we had to find a way to get together as a congregation with our pain, with our grief, confusion. And because of this then, right, this, again, current of who we are and who we are as a congregation, affirming the value of every person without exception, and also this strong undercurrent of what can we do to help. Safe Conversations was started as classes around what we can do around racism. I want to say that there were 10 to 15. I counted them the other day, and there was a good number of these. So a lot of us had gone through this. What was interesting about this time too is a pivotal moment for me is around the talk. I don't know if you guys had heard this, you probably are now aware, but the talk to me was always about birds and bees, right, that you had with your preteens. But there was a whole other level of talk that I never knew about until Brandy told me about it, that you had to have with your Black children, right, or your especially Black male child around his presence, not his gifts, not anything about him, but just his presence and how threatening it could be to someone else. And I think about that every time I take a walk, how much he might have to, if I encounter, we have several families in our neighborhood, but how much personality or emotions or just his own self he might have to pack inside to be less menacing to me. And how he has to not do that for a walk, but for a lifetime. So anyways, that was something that had come out of this, some of these safe conversations that I really had to grapple with as well. But out of those conversations and those classes, we got a lot of feedback too. Staff came to session with the clear and constant and consistent feedback, which was, what can we do? How can we help? The feedback from you all, from the congregation after all this. So upon hearing that call from the congregation, staff brought that up to session, and session entered into a time of discernment around this. Next slide, please. So any good discernment process, right, were we going to enter into this? This is a big ask of a congregation. This is our work, maybe, but we also are not necessarily equipped. Mostly, if you look at the demographics of us, there's a lot more probably white people than other kinds, other races. We don't know, should we take this on or not? This is a big ask of a church. So around that, we found some verses to help ground us biblically around some of the discernment we were going to do. One of them was Micah 6:8. He has told you, O mortal, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you but to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God. And then this other verse, Luke 4:16 through 21, is especially important as some scholars think this was Jesus's own mission statement and a statement about his ministry on earth. And then what's interesting about this is this also, I believe, was in Isaiah, and came after his first sermon and after a time in the wilderness, which, if you remember Jesus in a time in the wilderness, was also a discernment time. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery to the sight of the blind, to let the oppressed go free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. And so with that, we entered into a time of discernment. And Angela will tell us more about those details.
Good morning. I'm Angela Beetlesbacher. I would say Marion. Everybody says that wrong. Can you guys hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm currently serving as an elder, and I want to share with you all a little bit of the process that session has been through and what we anticipate going forward. So on the next slide, recap a little bit of what Liz said, that in the summer of 2020, we had safe conversations about racism. And we had a lot of meaningful discussion in those conversations, and the congregation kept asking, but we want to do more. We want to help in a tangible way. So in the next slide, talks about how the pastors came to session and asked the session if we could enter a process where we would prayerfully seek whether or not God is calling our church to address issues of racial injustice. So the next slide, session spent a lot of time discussing this. This was a big decision for session to make, and we really want to take our time, session, in any decisions we make, especially big decisions for the church. We don't want to rush into making decisions for the church, and listening to God just takes some time. You can't rush that. So on the next slide, after careful consideration, session voted to begin a process to, one, discern whether or not our church should actually try to address issues of racial injustice. And then after that, well, okay, if we feel God is calling us to try to address issues of racial injustice, then what process are we going to use to be able to figure out what we should do? And so we felt like this was a natural progression of living out our mission statement by entering this work. And we also felt like this work fit our church's vision to be a congregation that enters into long-term missional work. So on the next, thank you, Marion. Then we entered session, and staff did some training around racial injustice and some training around discernment. And it was helpful for me as we went through this training to see that everyone is not in the exact same place. So everyone comes with their own experiences, their own feelings, their own energy level around this topic. And that was okay that we weren't all in the same place. I expect that as the congregation gets more involved in this work, the same is going to be true of the congregation. But I've noticed throughout this work, I truly feel the Spirit has led us through this work, and I have full faith that the Spirit will continue to lead us through this work. So looking forward, that's a little bit about where we've been so far through this process. Now I'll talk about where we anticipate moving forward. So these town hall meetings, this is where we are right now. We're getting input from the congregation. And like Marion said, there will be a time at the end of the presentation for questions. If you have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat, and we'll address those at the end of the presentation. So session in our work, oh sorry, Mary, we're still on this previous slide. Thank you. Part of the session's work, we were just trying to discern, is God calling us to address this work? And so we discern that, yes, we do feel like God is calling us to address these issues of racial injustice, but we felt strongly in our discernment that the congregation needed to be involved in figuring out how we address those issues and figuring out or also being part of the implementation. This work couldn't be done without the congregation's involvement. So we realized in the first town hall meeting that we had last Thursday that the attendees expected us to come. Session had developed an idea of how we were going to address issues of racial injustice. So I want to apologize on behalf of the session if your expectation was that we had already developed what we were going to do. Sorry, we're not quite there yet. We really felt like in our discernment that the congregation needed to be involved in figuring out the how and implementing it. All right, now we're ready for the next slide. So the next steps after these town hall meetings, we're going to form teams, and that will continue on the work of figuring that out. What could our church do to address these issues, and how could that be implemented? So Cindy and Earl will talk next in detail about what those different teams would look like. After the teams do their work, then they'll present their recommendations to back to session. Session will develop a plan, report back to the congregation, and then the vision can be implemented. So on the next slide, what can we really expect after these town hall meetings are all done? So that was the question I kept, or even at the very end of this process, that was my question when we first started talking about this in session. I'm a doer, and I'm like, okay, but what are we really going to do? Like, what is this really going to look like at the end? And nobody could give me any answers. We don't know. We just don't know yet. We're still working through the process. We're still listening to God. So, but what we do know over these next few months, we're going to continue to seek how, in a tangible way, God's calling us to address issues of racial injustice. We're going to pray throughout the process. And we feel like this work is part of living out our mission statement. So next, Cindy and Earl will discuss the teams in detail and talk about how the congregation can get involved in this process. So I'll turn it over to Cindy.
Thanks, Angela. So why this particular organization? Why this structure? And what are these teams that Angela referred to in the previous slide? Well, every good plan needs definition and sound structure moving forward to be successful. This plan that we have come up with is a proven one with formidable outcomes. It's not a top-down approach, but a bottom-up that involves everyone. You are the building blocks that make it happen. So here is what it will look like for CCPC. First, because we are a spiritual group, we're a church, our inspiration, our direction, everything comes from God. So we begin a conversation with God and continue this relationship throughout the whole process. Then, with encouragement and guidance from God, we need to visualize, we need to dream what our direction will be. That's what this team will do. Third, we need to marry that vision with the reality of our specific church and our congregation. And finally, implement our ideas and visions. So how and with whom are these teams comprised? And how long will this all take? Slide. Mm-hmm. The prayer team will be made up of no more than 8 people, but in effect, every church member is part of this team. We need everyone to pray for guidance and direction. The team members who are those who enjoy corporate prayer, enjoy speaking directly to God, are confident in the power of prayer, and can feel the Spirit. CCPC has many who fit this description. If this describes you or someone you know, please suggest they volunteer for this team. The team will work together through the entire process. Slide. Oops. My paper's together. Next is the dream team, big thinkers with big visions, seeking the best case scenario for our church. These folks don't need to be realists. They are open to everything, anything, thinking outside the box. This group can reach out outside of our church and meet with community leaders for direction and urgent needs. This work will take about 3 months at the most, and the team will touch base with the prayer team so their work can be current. Both of these teams can start forming right now. And Earl will tell you about the other 2 teams.
This is Earl Berner. I'm on session. The groundwork team.
Hey, Earl, we can't see you. Can you readjust your thing where we can see you? Yes, thank you. Sorry, Gwen.
The groundwork team is expected to work for about 3 months, composed of essentially project managers. And they will take the findings and recommendations of the dream team, evaluate those against our current policies, practices, and also our resources to see where the proper fit is. Their findings and recommendations will then be brought to the session and staff, and following that, presented to the congregation for review and approval. Next slide. The implementation team, assuming approval of the congregation, is a team of 8, and they will be formed to implement the approved practices, and they will work with the staff to develop the strategies and take these to the ministry teams and committees of the church for inclusion in their work and their missions. This team will report their progress to the session and expect to take about 3 months to implement these with all the ministries. Understand that once it's in the ministries, we hope these are ongoing, long-term sorts of practices. And I want you to note that quote, "Am I willing to lose or give up my goals, wants to join with God's particular agenda with this initiative?" And both these teams will be in constant prayer with the prayer team. And of course, the prayer team gets to work the whole time, which is about 8 months from probably today or tomorrow. I turn over to Liz now for a recap.
All right, so a quick recap of what this is all about. We're asking the congregation to enter a time of discernment. So really what we're asking is to start praying. The prayer team is where we start here, and that is all of us. Okay, next slide or next piece. We arrived here because of who you are, who we are as a congregation. Next. We've done the most we can do as a staff in session, discern, discussed, and we're inviting the congregation to be involved. And the next steps are team formations and praying. And again, the discernment process is an interesting one and not one that has starts and a clear finish line. We are not necessarily sure what God is calling us to do. And there is a structure in all of this and how we get there. But he's equipped us and we're excited to see where he leads us. And with that, we're going to go over or just share our questions.